All right, hello class. So I wanted to record this video over the quadratic formula. So on 10-5 is our first introduction to the quadratic formula. And in theory, the quadratic formula is a formula used to help us factor define the zeros. And it really helps us when we cannot factor using X games, which we talked about in the previous unit about 2 units ago. So just to give you some information, we know that the zeros are when we get our product in parentheses and we solve, which we've been doing in lesson 10-1, 2, and 3. We use those in order to get our zeros. So we're going to use our formula today, and we're going to use 4 easy steps. So without further ado, I want to make sure that we focus on the actual procedure itself. And then if you have any questions, you can always go back and rewind this video, or you can ask me in class. So we have 4 steps. Step 1 is to identify A, B, and C. A, B, and C has not changed from when we dealt with polynomials first semester or factoring. A is still in front of x squared, B is in front of x, and C is the number without a variable. So to start, we're going to identify those. So A is going to be positive 2, B is 9, and C is 10. So remember, A, B, and C are numbers only, not a variable. And then for number 2, we're going to substitute the information from the formula into it. So at the top of your paper, you'll see the same formula, but I'm going to rewrite it so that we can refer to it. So in our first blank, we're going to be plugging in B, which in this case is 9. The second variable we're plugging in is B squared. So again, B is 9. And then AC. So anytime letters or variables are next to one another, that represents multiplication. So this is saying A times C. So we're going to multiply our A, which is 2, times our C, which is 10. And we'll have the number 20. And we'll go ahead and put that in parentheses. And then our last part in the second step is to plug in A. So it was 2 times A. So 2 times the number 2 because that was our A value. Step 3 is to go ahead and simplify our square root, which is often called our discriminant. So with the discriminant, we're literally going to be simplifying this portion of the quadratic formula in its own separate step to make sure there is no mistakes. So we're still going to plug in 9, and we're still going to put in parentheses 20. Currently, we will not be doing anything with the square root itself. When we simplify our square root or our discriminant, remember it was the square root of 9 squared minus 4, parentheses, 20. So the part we're going to be doing first is plugging that into the calculator. Now I know that some people have difficulty, so I wanted to show you a similar version to what we use in class. So I've got a TI-84, which is our graphing calculator, and you have a TI-30, which you're free to use. We're going to plug in the 9 squared minus 4, parentheses, times 20. So we're going to hit the number 9, and then that x squared button allows us to square, hit our minus sign, the number 4, and then parentheses, 20. Our calculator should produce the number 1. And that's going to help us with the step that we're at. So step 3 simplifies to the square root of 1. So now that we've plugged it into the calculator, we get that it is the square root of 1, which equals 1. So finally, we have step 4. So the thing that is important for us to remember is this is our new answer for, again, this section of the graph. So that long square root simplified to the number 1. And that will go in these 2 areas for step 4. So we still have negative B. So in this case, B is still going to be negative 9. And that plus minus sign just means we're going to separate it into 2 equations. One of them is going to be plus, and the other one's going to be minus. So we start off both of them with the negative 9, and then it's going to be plus whatever we got in step 3, so plus 1. And the other one's going to be minus 1. And we're not going to forget about our fraction. Remember, It was originally 2 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 simplifies to the number 4. And now we're just going to simplify these two statements. So negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. Negative 8 over 4 simplifies to negative 2. The second statement is negative 9 minus 1, which gives us negative 10 over 4. We can divide both those numbers by 2 since it does not turn into a whole number, which would end up resulting in negative 5 over 2. So again, identify A, B, and C. You're going to substitute A, B, and C into that quadratic formula, and the formula will be given. And once we do that, step 3 is all about simplifying the radical. After we simplify our radical, that radical is now replaced with the number 1, or sorry, in this case, whatever you get in step 3. And then step 4 is just simplifying the two separate fractions because one equation will have a plus and the other one will have a minus. We will do 2 more examples together as a class, and hopefully this will help you. Again, feel free to pause or go back anytime. Using the model for the 4 steps, we're going to start with step 1. Step 1 is always identifying A, B, and C. So A is 12, B is 47, and C is 40. Step 2 is to plug A, B, and C into the quadratic formula. Remember, you can look at your top of your paper to remember what the quadratic formula is, but for the purposes of this example, I'll rewrite it. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. We're going to substitute for b, a, and c. So x equals negative, b was 47, plus or minus the square root, here's our long part, b, so 47 squared minus 4, and then we're going to do that a times c. So 12 times 40, you can go ahead and use your calculator, I'll give you a moment. Turns out to be 480. And then if we want to condense any more, this says 2 times a. So we don't have to do 2 parentheses 12. We know the math. We can just do 2 times 12, which gives us 24. So that's step 2. Step 3, we're going to go ahead and simplify our square root. So the square root in step 2 is what we're going to simplify in step 3. So 47 squared minus 4 parentheses 480. Go ahead and plug 47 squared minus 4 parentheses 480 into your calculator. And you should have gotten 289. Remember, we have not square root yet. If you need a square root, the square root button is the second command button. So you hit second and hit that same x squared and plug in the number. You should have gotten an answer of 17. Please note that our answers for step 3 will not always be a whole number, but for the purposes of today, that's what it will be. So moving on to step 4, now we're going to kind of do a combination of things. We're ready to separate our 2 equations. So remember, we've got x equals and x equals, so we're going to have 2 different equations. It's negative b, so in this case it's going to be negative 47. One is going to be plus the 17 we just got in step 3 over 24. The second equation, which I want to make sure I divide it out, it's going to be negative 47 minus 17 over 24. And then we'll simplify it. Negative 47 plus 17 gives us negative 30 over 24. 30 and 24 can both be divided by the number 6, which will reduce it to 5 over 4. Negative 5 over 4. So that's one of our answers. For the second equation, negative 47 minus 17 gives us negative 64 over 24. We can divide those both by 8. And if you're having difficulty, please make sure you remember that you can use that pink factor sheet and look for the largest number that are factors of both numbers. So when we look at 64 and 24, the largest number that appears underneath both numbers is the number 8. So that's going to reduce to negative 8 over 3. So our second answer is negative 8/3. And there you go. Example number 2 is finished. So number 2, we're going to try to go a little bit faster, but make sure we understand the steps. Step 1 is to identify A, B, and C. So A is equal to negative 5, B is equal to 17, and C is equal to negative 6. Please note that the sign determines whether or not it's positive or negative that is in front of the number. Step 2 is to plug in our information. So X equals negative 17 plus or minus 17 squared minus 4, and we'll do A times C, which gives us positive 30, because negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30 all over 2A. So 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Step 3, we're going to simplify our square root. So our square root, again, is 17 squared minus 4 times 30. When we plug the 17 squared minus 4 times 30 in the calculator, we get 169. And the square root of 169 is 13. So I'm going to replace in step 4 with my 2 equations. I'm going to replace our long radical with 13. So X will be equal to negative 17 plus 13 over negative 10. And then our second equation will be negative 17 minus 13 over negative 10. We can simplify those. Negative 17 plus 13 is negative 4 over negative 10. We all know that a negative divided by a negative will turn that into a positive. And we can divide 4 and 10 by 2 to give us 2 over 5. So that's going to be one of our answers. Negative 17 minus 13 is negative 30 over negative 10. And negative 30 by negative 10 gives us positive 3. So that would be the answer to our second one. So hopefully this helps, and you are now able to do the quadratic formula.